Hi, everyone. It's Emily Wishall. I am the host of Radical Embodiment, and this is season 5 of the podcast. And in today's episode, I'm bringing you Leah Woods. We just finished the interview, and I'm walking away from our conversation just feeling deeply touched and inspired and connected. Leah and I met earlier this year and this summer in June 2024 doing a floor flow teacher training with Marlo Fiskin. So we were in a little awesome movement segment already. And she is just one of those humans who you would just immediately feel a connection and desire to be around. She's just, genuinely gracious, kind, humble, and accepting. Leah is a movement artist and teacher who is passionate about accessibility, creativity, and community. She holds an MFA in dance and performance from the University of Colorado, where she received her secondary emphasis in somatics for her studies in the Alexander technique, the Feldenkrais technique, and body-mind centering. She grew up studying West African dance, flamenco, and Middle Eastern dance. And then she attended Mills College in Oakland, where she studied dance as an undergrad. She's enjoyed an extensive performance career for over 11 years in the San Francisco Bay Area, where she performed, taught fitness, and yoga professionally. She now studies, lives, teaches, offers incredible gyrotonic classes and more in Boulder and in Denver. And she's passionate about health, wellness, and longevity. So this conversation I think it's just really informative. Leah has a lot of knowledge and positive, important perspective to share when it comes to movement, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to how we orient in our bodies. So I hope that you enjoy. Hi, everyone. Here I am with Leah Woods. Leah, I'm excited to have you here. And we are, of course, we were always just chatting before this, but it feels like exciting, bubbly honor to kind of dive in deeper into embodiment and movement with you. Because my experience of you is you're just this generous, welcoming human who she helped me learn how to do this back roll I was struggling with, but in such a just gracious, awesome way. So yay.
I'm excited to be here, Emily. Thanks for the invite. I've been thinking about it and excited to dig in with you.
So we start with this question that you've already told me. It's like, ooh, this is a big question.
Mm-hmm.
And it is. What embodiment means to you?
Yeah, I've been sitting with this one and it's interesting. We talk a lot about in the dance world how dancers are taught to speak so well with their bodies, but often are missing the verbal bit. And we just had a really beautiful teacher in town who's talking about the importance of embodied people or people in dance professions, or to learn to articulate these things. So what a beautiful challenge.
Yeah.
It came up as twofold for me. So there's kind of the meta, like how do I embody values? How do I live out values and cultural practices or beliefs? How does that enact in the world and manifest in the world? And then how what does it look like personally? What is the experience of being embodied? And we were chatting a little bit before this started, but I think for me, embodiment is about personhood. It's about being subject. We think a lot about in like the performance theory space, and if theory is murky, we can definitely depart. But Cartesian dualism was this really big movement in European philosophy, and that was the idea that the mind and the body are separate, and the mind is better than the body. It's more holy and pure, and the body is dirty and less than, and gets the mind to meetings circa now. And so I think a lot of embodiment to me is recollapsing, because I think a lot of cultures and practices for a long time had those two spaces collapsed into one. And that was a construct that lent itself to a lot of problematic and harmful ways of being in the world. Not all of them, but a good handful for sure. And so I think of embodiment as not that I have a body, but that I am a body. And that includes thinking, feeling, sensing, images, soul, that there's this collapse of those layers that were piecemealed out by other constructs, but there's this big return to subject. And I think we started to allude to this a little bit, but I think being female, biologically female and female identifying, I experienced so much of my developmental life as object is the body and subject is how I think privately or feel privately about that. And so embodiment has been about becoming subject in my body and having personhood and it being part of that and not something that can be seen or projected on externally, but something that I internally experience. That's where it kind of brought me. And then I think about practices like capoeira and contact improv, where we are embodying through community practice, consent, explicit consent, sensation, feeling our perimeter, our edges through contact or through game in space. And that these are ways we embody culturally values of saying each other's name at the beginning of a class. That's a political act to say your name, to use your voice and have it said back to you, to consent to touch and have your consent or lack of consent respected as a practice, and it's political. So I think about embodiment as meta and community practice, and then this personhood and this like reclaiming subject and the holistic subject. I don't know. That's where I got.
I love it. And I would love to dive in and kind of decipher more, specifically speaking to what you shared of kind of your own, I'm going to use the word evolution, but, growing maturation in your body of experiencing yourself and your body as like object, and then your sense of self or your feelings, your emotions were subject. And then now how the subject gets to be your experience in your body. And I might not be languaging that, correctly. So clarify however, but, can you speak more specifically on that of, if maybe there's a moment in time or a story that comes to mind or an example of like, how does that show up in a daily life, experience or interaction with someone, or in dance or in movement?
That what comes to mind is sort of a recent example as a student experiencer. So there's like, I have a teaching identity and a learning identity, and I love when they collapse too. That's even better. And then I'm thinking about kind of my roots in movement, and I'm thinking about, I'm a recent practitioner of capoeira. So probably the last year and a half. And I got my first belt in, I want to say May. And capoeira has been a really powerful journey for me for a lot of reasons. It's like helping me recover some old, certain corners of the dance world trauma, but it's helping me reconnect to, intergenerational movement practices. And it's also this really beautiful example of play, but also consensual violence and self-defense and self-agency and advocacy. And these are things that are a little bit fictitious for me. Like I think when I think of my young life, I come from a kind of unsteady household with domestic violence and my little nervous system having a lot of fear about violence and that kind of energy and humanity. So I'm thinking about a way that I've become subject is to be a small child and to have no real control over the situation, and to kind of collapse identity with the people or the adults around you and whatever's going on with them. And then to perceive whatever's going on with them as having to do with you, their anger, their violence, their addiction, as I must be wrong or bad. Yeah. And then as an adult to be back in situations where I am learning how to be in I'm going to say contra relationship. So there's like collaborative, and then there's like contradictory, and there's beauty in that, but to stand and be self-defending and in relationship to kicks flying at you. And even though it's a very kind and playful group of people, and they are really taking care of you, especially as a beginner, I'm still seeing places in my nervous system that are really being impacted by that history in me. And so to suddenly have skill and time and nuance and space to navigate it and to have agency and personhood and have a name that I speak and relationships to people and this ability to like tag in and consent to play. And then after, no matter what happens in a game, to be able to high five and like have relationship and process with that person is like profound and powerful in ways that I didn't even realize I needed when I started. It just seemed pretty and cool and fun. And so that's one example of this personhood that I'm finding now, which is just, the ability to play with things like consent and self-defense and self-advocacy and taking up space and pushing somebody back, even if it's a game and it's playful. It's been really powerful for me to have that space. And I'm also in contact improv land a bit. And there's a lot of work on consent and touch and maybe softer in some cases, although there's a lot of play with danger and surprise in that practice as well. But it's helping me, I think, as a people pleaser, which comes out of that same ethos. I always want to please. So being able to withdraw consent is really powerful, because for a long time it was like, I will because I don't want to make waves, or I'll consent for the larger whole. But to have permission to actually say, actually not today, and have it not be a problem or be a bad student, but for it to be celebrated as another option in the space feels like powerful practice.
Totally, definitely. And I just want to reflect back also both of those examples you gave with a little bit of background from your childhood. It also, like, what incredible, purposeful, intentional, not also just how it shows up, ways to reprogram and heal some of that trauma, heal your nervous system in containers that are really safe and welcoming, and that like that you can play and you can bow out at any time. And
safety is interesting because it also allows us to deal with dosage. So I think we can get, and I don't know how to say this correctly, like I'm going to fumble forward with language because this is an area of nuance I'm trying to understand, which is that there is a positive dosage of challenge, or even the physiological stuff that comes up. There's a positive supportive dosage that I can lean into and work through. And then there's a non-constructive dosage. And that's something that only the person can navigate. But that for a long time, I felt like it's complete avoidance of the thing. And actually, in working in the chronic pain space and looking at neuroscience, like learning that a little bit of frustration or a little bit of uncertainty or a little bit of that, just the beginning feeling, and then to have it met in a way that it can ride to resolve. It's like really great proof to me that we can do all of the work individually for sure, but we need each other. And that actually relational work is really powerful, and something that movement can really give us is community and relationships to also do this work in, which means sometimes writing a very safe line that only you can navigate, but is also something that you have to deal with. Is just dosage. What's the right amount of tiptoeing in for me today?
Yes. Yeah. I think of that a lot as like titration even, and like titrating experiences. And it's not an area, all of this is not a black and white area. There's so many nuances. And that's where I think it comes into not only self-regulation, but reading into maybe, I went I'm a little beyond what's safe and okay for me.
Yeah.
Is there a way that I can come back, that I can titrate back or lean out, or maybe like realizing like, okay, all of a sudden, like, no, I need to stop in these practices that you're speaking to.
Oh, for sure.
Like that, those are spaces I'm sure you're able to do that in, which is incredible.
Or I'm learning, it's helping me learn.
Sure.
This is like, I need to go regulate again, like self-regulate or co-regulate sometimes. I also think it's nonlinear. like we're saying that every day is a little different. And I'm always really surprised, like I'll feel really great. And then who knows, on a given day, like it'll just be different. And so that's beautiful that it's a real organic process, which isn't just scaling the trajectory, but it's like a real dance. Like you're doing a dance, but you're also dancing this personhood piece, which is really nice. And I think I think that's how I kind of came into movement. Is I ended up in like kind of Middle Eastern, West African, and flamenco dance first, which is not a very common entry point, I think, for movement. But I specifically got super into dance in a program for at-risk teenage girls specifically. That was called SEEDS, which is self-empowerment education and self-esteem through dance. And I think about how the framing of that early introduction was really powerful, because you have, I walked through modern dance and ballet training spaces eventually as well. And the culture and the context and the kind of learning and the verticality, the like vertical hierarchy of certain learning spaces versus kind of horizontal learning spaces. But I just felt really lucky that my first really big role model was this beautiful woman named Mira Crean, who is a philosopher, witchy, voluptuous, gorgeous Middle Eastern dancer who was just curvaceous and stunning and sensual, and introduced us to dancing together. And then we would spend an hour dancing, and then a half hour or an hour kind of in conversation about things like, what is beauty? And we're like teenage girls who are going through peak objectification and home crises and like all of the things going on. And we would sit in community with each other and try and grapple with these questions. And I think about how lucky that was, and how that's not all the spaces I've been in. And how it gave me so much clear contrast between the different kinds of containers I've kind of encountered in movement and dance. And then what I hope to offer, or what I value now, both as a student and a learner and, fellow researcher of being alive in a body.
What an incredible group. And that was your introduction to dance, was through that group, through that program. Am I understanding that right?
I had done some, like I did West African dance on weekends outside of that group. There's like a big, it was like by a farmer's market, and there's live music, and we would go across the floor, and it was like all ages, mamas carrying their babies, kids running around, live drums. And then I learned a little bit of flamenco, and like there was this particular teacher brought in some like classical Indian dance influences here and there. And then later I went off to college and like learned classical Western technique, but I had started in these other technical forms. And
that's curious.
It was different. And I think everything's got its thing, but I do feel really grateful that my introduction to dance was like, life was a boiling pot of chaos and like a garbage fire and an interpersonal nightmare. But dance was this little spot after school where I came, where the adult was sober, and the kids were present, and we were not getting into trouble. And we had somewhere to be with someone who was paying attention, who was present, and who was trying to cultivate a sense of community for us. And we were messy kids for sure, but it was a really good intro, and kind of, I think, probably one of the most powerful applications of dance or movement or embodiment practices is like how they help us interface with community and practice self and community.
How to practice self in community.
Self and self in, I guess.
Self
both.
and self in. I wasn't sure.
Let me think about it. Me neither. I'm like,
I want to, both before going kind of deeper into the story, which I'm like loving to hear, is, if you don't mind just kind of backing up, and for anyone, if the languaging was new, kind of, speaking to vertical leadership versus like horizontal leadership.
Great. And I'm still always learning about this, but vertical structure, I would think I've had some teachers and experiences as a learner of like, there is an overt person in control and power, and they are an absolute version of that power. And I think this can be this can be wielded well too. But I think I'm the boss and I tell you what's important and when, and, I kind of filter information to you, and I'll tell you what you need to know. It's kind of my impression of more vertical learning, kind of top down, and then horizontal learning. I think can think of it as more of like a feminist pedagogical structure, or like a feminist teaching educational structure, where it has more to do with facilitating and trying to source the experiences of the people in the room or in the classroom or in the learning experience. So you offer something, but you take time and space, which is political, to take time and space to have people reflect on their experience. And I think, and add their understanding, their process, to ask questions, to help in some ways lead the direction. So it's sourcing the room and what's happening and allowing people's voices to collaborate in that. And less about you need to get here by what we call end gaming in somatics. We need to get to a handstand. There's an objective that we have to arrive at, and more about prioritizing, how do I feel and what am I sensing on the way? And then maybe I arrive there, but it's a result of, or it's an emergence, we'll say, of me being in process, which is nonlinear and all these other things. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I want to say, or if I should say any more about this kind of horizontal idea in facilitation. And I think the trick is that everything is learning, including trying to facilitate these kinds of spaces, is also an education and a learning, and has to be porous and open and prioritize the humans in it over the system. Like I think about in education, like I come from academia, and it's very easy to prioritize the syllabus over the people coming in the room looking wrecked mid-semester, who are tired and run down and human people. So it's this idea of like, is there some balance between the system we're in, but the people, and how do we reprioritize the humaning? And I don't know, no answers, just this is the idea, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like an ongoing conversation, but it feels such an important conversation. It seems like such an important inquiry for anyone who's facilitating, who's leading, who's guiding, of just that, what you said, prioritizing the human over like prioritizing the system, or that end game, or this is where we have to get. And even as you're speaking, I feel in my own body such a different resonance in those two distinctions, where I like soften when I'm like, oh, like me as a human's involved. Or if I were teaching, like, oh, like getting to like the humans are helping to evoke what's being elicited, or what's where we're going.
Yeah. And it means it's more messy. Usually it means that there's a certain amount of like dropping the urge to get somewhere, and sometimes going like, but here's where we are.
Which is scary.
It is. And you feel like, oh, and then are people going to value it if we don't arrive at a thing too? Because then we have all these value systems. So it feels like confronting a lot of edges at once, and it's messy and imperfect, but so are people, and it's an experiment. So that's a lot of the spaces I'm interested in now, is like, how do we people while we also try and learn a new skill, because it's good for our brain, or, and then how do we frame learning a new skill, not as I can't do it, I'm failing, but look at my brain and a new thing. That's so interesting how a brain learns a new thing. And like, how do we get curious about learning, and not, can I do it by the end of one class or even 10 classes? Like, can I feel?
Can I stay in which is ongoing. It's not like, oh, okay, now I'm feeling always. It's like, at least for me, I'm like constantly like reminding myself, because my brain likes to go in, which my brain's amazing, and also like judging, or this or that, or tracking in a way that I
was just thinking, we had this lovely guest, and we've been talking a lot about what comes up in physical practice, and she calls it times I'm going to try and remember, but it's thoughts, images, memories, emotions, sensations, and impulses. But the idea is, I'm doing something that's difficult, maybe in a yoga class. I don't know if people have ever experienced this, but you're in a very difficult pose maybe, and you start to feel the difficulty. And then right away, I start my thoughts. This is my process. I'll just speak to what happens for me. This is really hard. I wish I was more flexible. And then I have an image of what I think it should be. And then I start to have a memory about another time that I felt like I wasn't good enough. And then I start feeling not good enough because my emotions cascading. And then I'm like kind of separating from my sensations. And so this really beautiful physiological practice happens, or process happens in practice, which is to watch sort of how we dissociate or how we escape a hard thing or moment, or how we have, maybe more adequately to say, like, brilliantly engineered ways of dealing with things in our life. Like we found habits that have served us in the past. Like, I will just leave into thought this hard moment. So it's like learning is a really great opportunity to investigate the physiological thing, the ride that starts when something comes up for us, and then just go, oh, how quickly can I shake off the physiological thing or not? And that's okay too. Yeah. Anyways, I'll park that, but it just,
well, that's a great thing to name and decide, right? Because I think that I would imagine most folks can relate to some experience, especially learning a new skill or being in movement. And it's so good for us all to continually talk about it, because it's like, you're not alone in that. That doesn't mean anything's wrong with you. It doesn't mean you're not there yet or not confident. It just is. It's just part of what happens. And I think the key is I love the acronym, because I think that acronym can help just like name it quicker, to shake it off or to lean into it, whatever. But choice is available when you can name it.
And it's actually normal. Like, that's what really blew my mind when I started to track. I was like, oh, this is actually the normal thing. I'm physiologically designed to seek comfort and and coziness and safety. And so it's great for me to grow, but in order to grow, it means I'm going to interface with this physiological process. And that's actually the sign that I'm in a growth place. And so it's just, am I in the right threshold of that physiological response today? Or is it a little too much? Again, it's the dosage thing.
Anyways. Yeah. Maybe I want to put on a cozy sweater while I dive in.
Maybe today is for rest, and maybe tomorrow is for writing these are the negotiations, but maybe today I feel ready to play with my physiological learning process. And maybe some days it's like, I've been out there working up in the end stages of capitalism, so I'm gonna rest, and that's cool.
For you to kind of share, Leah, your journey through, from coming from, Middle Eastern African dance, and then, entering university, going to college and studying more Western dance, which I'm imagining is a little more static. I mean, I don't have a dancing background, so that could be very wrong or rigid or structured, but I am, really curious of your journey, and let's segue in how that was and what came up for you in that process.
Yeah. I mean, I think what was really interesting is I had this really sensuous teacher, and then I moved to the Bay Area to pursue education and to dance. And then I started, at a certain point, I was dancing in nightclubs for a living. And so I think that was also this really weird trajectory of this, like, object versus subject process. So I just sort of dropped that in there to go, like, it's been back and forth and all around, nonlinear. But I moved out to the Bay Area, and I wanted to dance professionally, and was studying with a woman named Suhaila Salampour in East Bay, and then also trying to pursue ballet and modern, and get, like, at the time, and I want to name that, I feel very differently about this now, and I think very differently about this now, but I'm just going to name the framework I had in my mind at the time, which is I was going to go get real technical training. And now, having, kind of dissected a lot of that, I can really feel how problematic it is to imagine that only ballet and modern Western Eurocentric Europeanist forms would be real. I think that's something that really needs to get unpacked and talked about more. Middle Eastern dance is a deeply powerful and real technique, as is West African dance, it was Ghanaian, as are all these forms. They're all equally valid and very important. So just to name that, at the time I thought that was what I thought I was doing. I was going to go get real technique, and I've gotten to deconstruct that many times over now. But I went to school, I kind of skip, like, the overly complex version for something a little more trackable, but went and studied dance at Mills College in Oakland, and they had Cunningham and Paul Taylor and ballet technique. And I was studying and San Francisco with my teacher, Augusta Moore, and kind of in my early 20s. And dance can be a space that has historically been very body shaming. And I was never a long, lean, typical dance body, I will say. I think George Balanchine, the choreographer, had a habit of measuring that people had small heads and long necks and short torsos and long limbs, and like literally measured people's bodies. So walked into a space where I felt that pressure all of a sudden of, oh, I've been in these spaces that are not measuring anyone, that's for sure. And even I would say Middle Eastern dance they like jiggle. Like there's a vibratory quality to the body that is part of the movement quality, and part of its relationship to music. So that was my, first home. And so then to suddenly be in ballet and standing in front of a mirror and like tenduing, which is a beautiful practice, but I definitely objectified myself. Like I remember standing back and just looking at a mirror version of myself and trying to be a shape in space and trying to perfect the shape in space. I think there's beautiful somatic approaches to ballet. That's not what I was doing in my early 20s. And got a lot out of modern and postmodern dance, and got little seeds planted in my brain, but then continued to dance through my 20s and like nightclubs and perform and have my midriff showing, and like definitely had this really interesting tug of war between like the beautiful sensuous roots of this dance form that I was really trying to study in earnest, and then what it was to be a woman in spaces being looked at, and where money was tipped into a belt, and all of the cultural negotiations around that, which is a whole nother podcast. We could talk about identity politics in the Middle East and the history of how that all came over and perception. But for intensive purposes of keeping it here, I just think I oscillated back and forth between going to modern and ballet and street dance rehearsals and classes, and then being in Middle Eastern dance and in these costumes, and really feel like I was in this like object subject tug of war, often in object land. Danced in the Bay Area for 11 years and then moved to Colorado in 2015 to pursue my master's in dance, and really got the opportunity. I really studied like dance and culture. I was really interested in like dance ethnography and then somatics. And so that was a really great place to go, this is really interesting. Like there's really different ideas of a pelvis depending on what kind of dance form you're doing. The pelvis functions really differently in West African than in ballet, than in Pilates, than in Mapuka, than in Middle Eastern dance, and just started to really notice all of the cultural values and coding that goes into the body and how it's super culturally dependent and not at all consistent across different places. And then also got some deeper learning in somatics and dropping in and really getting into the sensation part of things. Yeah.
Let's go there. Let's go into
Yeah.
the somatic sensations as you dropped into that. Like love, like this vast, spectrum of movement and dance you've had. And to go from all of that and then start, as you're going into your master's, studying the somatics, getting into the sensation, and then like, not that you weren't in your body before, but like, I would imagine experiencing movement in your body in a newer, different way.
Sure.
Is that true? Sure. Or maybe the emphasis in a different way?
Oh, for sure.
How did you notice then that like shift your orientation to yourself or shift your orientation to your body? Say if you were dancing in front of a mirror, and again, not making one right or wrong as far as like body as subject or object, but kind of the dance, the duality between the two.
Yeah. I will say in my 20s, I was also working in the fitness space. So there was this whole other like teaching fitness all day for like getting over use injuries for being in fitness spaces, and also being a different kind of body than a lot of the other people teaching in that space, and just like tracking all that. So then when I got to graduate school land and was really thinking about culture and values and how that shows up in forms, and then doing somatics, things like gyrotonics that don't have mirrors, and things like Feldenkrais and Alexander technique, which are really about proprioception in
Mm.
space. Like, can I feel myself in space? Can I
Mm.
be holistic in the sense, can I feel my feet on the floor? And can I
Mm.
have a relationship between that and the top of me? And that takes you so far out of a mirror and
Mhm.
size and whatever you're doing, like,
Yeah.
I think about some of the things that came up in the fitness space I was in, some of the things that I heard other teachers say about
Mm.
wearing white linen before labor, like whatever things about working out that like now I just think, whew, so glad
Wait, and
there's
they were
some.
saying in the fitness space, don't wear white linen before Labor
Oh no,
Day?
they were saying if you want to be able to, then you better do 20 more of this, or like,
Oh,
or
what?
get your,
To give like
yeah,
that's
these,
what gave you permission to wear white before
yeah, like you had to work all of this like really problematic fitness framing. And I knew it. Like I remember walking through that space and being like, this is such a weird world. I'm here for a paycheck and like to move my body during the day and to support my dance. But that, to suddenly get to be in a somatic space where we
Mm.
just feel or like curious about my cells, like to get to the level of curiosity about my cells and sensation and the
Yeah.
relationship between the different parts of me to one whole. Like there's these really beautiful metaphors in somatic about like all of the different organs and cells, they collaborate on this really egalitarian homeostasis. They all serve a very different function. They can't be the same, but they come together as a whole to create this really beautiful ecosystem. And just getting into the imagery,
It's
sensitivity, it's powerful compared to
so
that other
different.
space.
I
So
even
different.
just feel, I'm imagining you felt a huge sense of relief.
And I found for sure, and I just kept feeling like my own interest in teaching and dancing got farther and farther away
Mm.
from certain things. Like, I think about things like Gaga, where there's no mirrors, and contact improv, there's no mirrors, and capoeira, there's no mirrors. And I feel like I went from, and I love Middle Eastern dance, was my first home, and I will always love her. And I have so much deep appreciation. And I just felt like I started to just really appreciate all of the different messaging from all the different places. And like, it almost felt like, can it point us a little closer to what a home is or some idea of it? And
Mm.
I went to this great program where they were like breaking, ballet, modern, Middle Eastern, contact improv, equally valid and important. And you'll take all of it.
Mm.
And you'll take somatics. So I feel like I emerged from that program and with a lot of the like lens on cultural studies and
Mm.
ethnography and specifically performance studies, which is really interesting. It just looks at, I kind of got obsessed with the cipher, and that's kind of a metaphor for kind of how I emerged, I think, which is, you know, Western performance often had, it's emulated. The hierarchy is kind of emulated in the stage. You have this platform, and then you have a slanted stage, and people can have access based on what tier of ticket they can afford to see. You have different proximity to the art. And I just kept thinking about folk dance, which is like everybody that I've ever heard of has a folk dance, except for, I don't know about the Amish. I don't know if they have folk dance, but every culture other than that I can think of had a folk dance that came out of it. And all of them were for all humans. Most of them happened in a circle, which automatically has a certain kind of egalitarian inclusivity.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I got really nerdy about things like how my cells are moving and how do we physically gather in space? Like, what does it say when we stand in a circle versus when the
Mm.
stage is slanted? And what does it mean when the teacher stands at the front of the class, it says one thing, or when they sit in a circle and talk to you? So I don't know if that got too unlinear, but I feel like it was just a pressure cooker of like deconstructing a lot of things for me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think all of that is definitely trackable,
Yeah.
and good and like
Yeah.
and juicy. And there's a lot to unpack there. And I feel like we could continue this conversation for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But what I want to ask and kind of go into is, I'm just genuinely curious, and I think it would be also of value to listeners of like, what has you feeling most alive in the movement space right now? And that could be like in your own movement practice or what you're seeing in the shift in movement spaces. But like, what's feeling most alive for you?
Hmm. This quality of research. I think for a really long time, I thought about like almost like consuming movement. Like I need to go out and learn the moves from here, the moves from there, and I really loved this reframe that I think is big in Europe and is kind of catching on here, but is alive in things like contact improvisation to a certain extent, and forms like Gaga, which is from Israel. And it's like an improvisation class with no mirrors and just embodied improvisation.
Mm.
And I think I'm really interested in this research because I spent my whole life trying to train to be in people's pieces and be wanted and to be able to audition. And I remember looking around in my early life and trying to see if there were other bodies like mine in the spaces that I was in, like if I was likely to get certain auditions based on that. And now I'm 37. And so often there's mostly people in their 20s in a lot of dance spaces. That depends on the dance space. But now I find myself looking around and going like, I'm happy to be here in my body as who I am at my age, to give permission to whoever needs it. Like, see that as a function of being in the room now is like,
Yeah.
great. Well, like by being here, someone can look around and be like, I have a butt. I'm allowed to be here. Like, hopefully. And I think what's the most alive for me, this quality of research, what it's really given me for the first time in my life is I'm just training to be myself. I don't have to train to be in anyone's piece or choreography or I don't need anything from anyone anymore. So I get to just train to be who I want to be and move how I want to move. And that's radical. I think that happened because I had a really bad accident in 2019, right before COVID. And I ended up like bedridden for like a year and a half. I had 6 surgeries. I wasn't going to walk anymore. I totally retired from dance and like grieved it out of my body for a year. But it was actually this really big gift because once I did eventually rehab it 3 years, like 3 years long, and all of a sudden I had this really deep and radical permission to be like, oh, I was told I'd never be here anyway. So I don't owe anybody anything. And I get to just be me now. I get to train to be me and explore to be me. So this quality of research is like this permission to just really utilize whatever is being dropped into the space by facilitator to imbue me with whatever makes me more connected to my own curiosity. Like that's been really powerful to just research myself, you know?
Yeah. I love that. That's incredible. And yeah, like, I think that, I mean, I myself can like take a lot from that of like, yeah, just moving in a way to know myself more, to be more of me, is not that there's an end goal, but like is such a, wow, what a place to get to be. How fun, like how never ending, and how, yeah, that feels like exciting to me. So I feel that you're like, yeah.
I used to think too, like, oh, the best, like I remember being in my 20s and thinking the best job is with this company or like trying to get that. And I'm like very convinced that the people who have it best in the whole dance world are the people who are training to be themselves. You're having the best time. I can't tell you how many interesting exploitative contracts and situations there are. And there's something actually truly magical about being in a space where your pursuit of dance is for you. It's cool. It's very cool.
Very magical. Yeah. Yeah. So to kind of bring our conversation to a closure, I want to ask you, and maybe you have a thought to this or whatever comes to mind, like a suggestion or practice that you have for somebody who, wants to on a more daily basis live more embodiedly and make that radical choice to like choose to be in their body.
Yeah. Oh man, it's such a personal journey. The first thing that kind of came up for me, and I realized that this is kind of a challenging answer maybe in some ways, but is to find a community that holds containers that make you feel safe to play with dosage of whatever it is you're working through, that make you feel like you have permission to human and help you on the days you're feeling up to it, go through your physiological reactions to trying new things or being asked of new challenges. And on other days, just pay you total and complete respect and hold you in needing a different thing that day. I think for a long time I had a lot of individual pursuits in movement. And I really think, the lineage I'm in now with kind of the movement culture movement, I'll say, is there's many things there. There's much to be mined and healed there. But one thing I really liked about the idea of the person who kind of headed it off, his name's Ido Portal. Now there's many other kind of directions from that community and investigations happening. But he said, moving in community, like, one of the things we don't have now is a sense of interdependence and community. And I think maybe community is something you also dose up to sometimes, depending, like it can be a lot to show yourself. I had a powerful professor of mine that I still think about this all the time. She always said, allow yourself to see and be seen, to see others and be seen by others. And that's like a deep, powerful vulnerability practice, especially if you add something like improvisation or moving into it. So it's no small ask. And I really want to acknowledge that that's not little. That might be the biggest thing for anybody is to really let yourself see and be seen. But my recommendation is to find spaces and containers where you feel enough trust to work through the stuff, the physiological stuff of learning, and to really, really prioritize your sensation, especially if you, are in circumstances where there's a lot. I just think the more you can anchor to sensation and be in the sensory experience of your body, the more it can help when the mind and the thought stuff, which are great, they're supposed to be there. There's a biological imperative for why, and we really respect that. But when you can come back to sensation, it can really help reground. So sensation and community with healthy containers, I think easier said than done.
Yeah. I think essential. So that's a great answer. Leah, I loved getting to listen and learn from you. So much juice that you have to offer, and just your deep level of presence is just a gift to get to be in connection with. And so where can folks who are listening, if they want to learn more about you, find ways of working, or, what you're up to, where can they go?
Probably the best place is Instagram at the moment. I should probably work on that, but at the exact moment, Instagram, I'm at Leahzia _movement. So that's LEAHZIA_MVMNT. And you can always email me. Just my last name dot my first name at Gmail. Happy to have dialogues. I really, enjoy conversation and dialogue, and like to, know what people are up to. I work with people in the chronic pain space, and then I teach movement classes to the human population, which includes a lot of different things, but is, I think the hidden curriculum of that, like, there's strength and mobility and cartwheels and whatever, but the actual thing we're teaching is moving in community and how to learn, just having a process around learning. And then I teach gyrotonics. So people in chronic pain or who want to feel really good, like a movement massage. So yeah, it's probably the best.
Amazing. And I'll link your Instagram so people can easily find that in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you again. And for everyone tuning in and listening, and if you don't already, like playing around, experimenting with what communities of movement are in your area. And really, I love that prioritizing sensation. And again, easier said than done, and like golden though, like it is. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Thanks for listening. Take care, everyone.